companies don't really understand who the competition is in the minds of customers. And so they do a bad job of positioning because they've got these poor assumptions. If you have a brand new thing and it's not even in the market yet, you may have what I would call a positioning thesis. I think we compete with these guys, and I think this is the value we're going to deliver those guys can't. And therefore, I think these are the kind of customers that are going to love me, and this is how I'm going to win. But you don't know until you actually get out in the market, and a lot of times your assumptions prove to be incorrect. If I'm going to build messaging on the homepage, I need to understand, well, who's my messaging for? So what does a best fit customer look like? And then I got to think about, well, what am I trying to communicate? I'm trying to communicate what's the value that I can provide those customers that no other solution can. So I need to understand that positioning to go build messaging.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to position your B2B SaaS with the goal of achieving explosive growth. My guest today is April Dunford. April is the founder of the agency called Ambient Strategy, where she advised over 200 plus tech companies on positioning, market strategy, and product marketing. She's a board member to various startups and the author of the books Obviously Awesome and Sales Pitch, How to Craft a Story to Stand Out and Win. She's been consulting over 10 years for companies like Google, IBM, Epic Games, Postman, and a lot of mid-sized SaaS companies. I personally have seen her at all the major SaaS events as a speaker, so it's really great to have her on the show today. Welcome to the show, April.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
We're going to dive right in. If we're going to talk about positioning, how would you even explain positioning to somebody who doesn't know what it is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because as the positioning expert, when I started doing this work, there wasn't a lot of people talking about positioning. And so I always had to start with a definition of it. People will get positioning confused with messaging, for example. I think positioning is an input to messaging, but it's not the same thing as messaging. The same thing with branding. People will say it's like branding, and they'll even use the phrase brand positioning. That kind of bugs me because I think there's branding, there's positioning, and those two things are separate. So my definition looks like this. Positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at delivering some value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. It defines who are my competitors? What do I have that's different from my competitors? What is the value that I can deliver that none of those other alternatives can? And then what kind of customer is a really good fit for my value? And what is the market that I intend to win? If you came to me and said, April, we need to do messaging, I'd say, great. Who's the message for? Who do we compete against? And how do we win? I'd need all those things as an input before I could actually start crafting the copy for my homepage or anywhere else. That's how I think about positioning.
Nice. Love it. I mean, it's really important to have your positioning, right? I think that's pretty clear. But why is it important to have a really clear positioning like you defined it just right now?
Well, a lot of things flow downstream from that. So if you think about, if I'm going to build messaging on the homepage, I need to understand, well, who's my messaging for? So what does a best fit customer look like? And then I got to think about, well, what am I trying to communicate? I'm trying to communicate what's the value that I can provide those customers that no other solution can. So I need to understand that positioning to go build messaging. If I have a sales team, for example, I'm trying to build a sales pitch. Well, what's the job of a sales pitch? The job of the sales pitch is to answer the question, why pick me over the other things you could pick? Positioning is the definition for that. It's the definition of who's my competition? What have I got that's different? What's the value I can deliver the other guys can't? And, why is it a good fit for a particular kind of customer? So we really need to have this positioning as like the foundation of everything we're doing in marketing and sales. If we have weak positioning, then we're going to have weak messaging. We're going to have a weak sales pitch. So we need to start there as the foundation for everything else.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned is not the same as brand, is not the same as messaging. You didn't like the word brand positioning. How would you explain the difference between positioning and branding?
I'm going to caveat this with, I've seen so many definitions of branding. I don't know how people figure it out that aren't marketers, because it feels to me like marketers come up with a new definition of branding every time we turn around, and sometimes that definition includes positioning. And so then they say, well, if I define it this way, what's the difference between positioning and branding? I say, well, if you define it that way, then the difference does not exist. But in my world, and I'll clarify, my world is big ticket enterprise B2B stuff. In big ticket enterprise B2B tech, when we talk about branding, branding includes a lot of things. It includes the iconography that we use. It includes things that sound simple that aren't, like what kind of pictures are we going to use, and what is the font we're going to use, and what's kind of the vibe we're going for with our brand. What's the tone of voice we're going to use in our marketing communications? And if you think about it, like the branding in terms of the colors and the way we speak and the way we would do graphics and pictures for something like software for a daycare, for example, where you might want to be really playful and have things that feel childlike almost, and you have a bit of whimsy in the way you talk about stuff, and you can maybe be quite casual in the way you speak. Versus what would my brand look like if I do security systems for a bank? Well, I don't want playful and whimsical, man. This thing needs to convince me that we are trustworthy, we're solid, we're serious people doing a serious thing. The colors are going to be different. The iconography is going to be different. Our tone of voice is going to be much more directive and authoritative. In my opinion, that's the branding stuff. It would make sense that I would figure out my positioning first and have that as an input to my brand. Like, who are my target customers? What do they like? What do they want in a brand? And what are they looking for? And then how can we align with that from a branding perspective? So I think branding is really important, but it's very separate from positioning. And I think ideally your positioning is an input to the brand stuff.
Yeah, makes sense. We're gonna talk about positioning, even if you do know something about branding or don't. Is branding important for any kind of business? Because you worked with a lot of mid-sized SaaS companies, you work with a lot of enterprise companies.
Yeah. Positioning. Here's the way I would look at this. Doing positioning now, whether you like it or not, and whether or not you're doing it well. So, is it important? You're already doing it. And so the way it works, if you think about it, like positioning is almost like the way we show up in the market in a lot of ways and what people think about our stuff. We might not have done a positioning exercise explicitly, but when we wrote our marketing copy or created the sales deck, we had some stuff in our mind. Like we were thinking, we made some assumptions about who our competitor was. We made some assumptions about why people would pick us over anybody else. We made some assumptions about who would be on the receiving end of this and who would be a customer that we would be talking to. So I think it's very important for anybody. A lot of times we'll make those assumptions, but the assumptions are incorrect. Or worse and more common, the assumptions on the sales team are different from the assumptions on the marketing team, and they're different from the assumptions in the product team. So what we really want is really tight positioning that is consistent across the company that we deliver in a consistent way. So in the work I do with companies, the companies are all different sizes. The commonality is that they have a product in market. They kind of have an idea of who loves their stuff and why. They're just not doing a really great job of communicating it in a way that it's really easy for customers to understand. Great positioning makes your differentiated value or why pick me versus the other guys really obvious to the customers you're trying to sell to. Now, if you have a brand new thing and it's not even in the market yet, you may have what I would call a positioning thesis. I think we compete with these guys, and I think this is the value we're going to deliver those guys can't. And therefore, I think these are the kind of customers that are going to love me, and this is how I'm going to win. But you don't know until you actually get out in the market. And a lot of times your assumptions prove to be incorrect. So I think really early stage company should have a thesis. They should write it down and test against that thesis. But I don't think they should expect to have their positioning perfectly tightened up until they've gotten a first wave of customers and they know a bit more about how customers behave and how our stuff shows up in the market.
Yeah, because in the end, it's going to be an iterative process where you keep reshaping it. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see, especially SaaS companies make while positioning their product?
So the first mistake I see SaaS companies make is they just don't think about positioning at all. They kind of have this idea that I got this thing and everybody's going to love it. And all I got to do is show you the stuff and everyone will just buy it. So they almost think about their stuff as being alone in the market. They don't think about the fact that A B2B buyer is going to put you on a short list and compare you to other things. So they're not specifically trying to highlight, well, how are we different than the other things in the market? Or they're not trying to specifically communicate to a certain kind of customer that is a really good fit for their stuff. So that the number one thing is they just don't think about positioning at all. And they're just kind of bumbling their way through it. Now, sometimes we get a product where the value is obvious, the segmentation is obvious, and the company comes out of the gate and it just ain't that hard. It is obviously hitting the mark and the company just goes. The problem is that often that happens when there's not a lot of competition in the market. The thing you have is truly innovative and amazing, and there's a lot of market demand for it. And then what happens is, you'll get some competitors will catch up to you at some point, or maybe some competitors, now that you've proven the market exists, some competitors will come in and do things a little bit differently. And now you've got to do this positioning to say, well, why me and not these other folks? Now I got other folks and I'm not just competing with Excel. And so then the companies will be like, well, shit, we don't know how to do that because we never did it in the first place. It was just kind of instinctual. So that's the first problem. Second problem that I see a lot is companies don't really understand who the competition is in the minds of customers. And so they do a bad job of positioning because they've got these poor assumptions. For example, it's really common for me to get these earlier stage startups will call me and they'll say, yeah, we got this thing. It's amazing. And I'll say, who do you compete with? And they'll give me a big, long list of competitors, like huge, long list. And I'll say, okay, well, so how do you beat those guys? And they'll say, ease of use. We got this thing and we could do it in 2 clicks. And all the other guys, it takes 59 clicks and it's really hard and it's ease of use. So that's how we're going to win. And I say, okay, ease of use. That sounds good. And then I say, but hey, I never heard of any of these guys. Like, do you ever lose a deal to these guys? And they'll say, well, no, actually, we don't. And I'll say, well, does that mean you win every deal? Every customer you talk to, you win? And they say, no, no, no. We lose a lot of deals to just like no decision. And I'll say, well, okay, no decision. So what are the companies doing to solve the problem? If they're not using you or any of your competitors, what are they doing? They say, oh, they're just like, use pen and paper, Excel, or did you just hire an intern to do it? And I'm like, oh, so your competition is the intern and your positioning is you should pick me because of ease of use. Do you know what's really easy to use? The intern. The intern's really easy to use. You're like, hey, Joey, give me a coffee. Fill out the spreadsheet. Come back when you're done. Like, you're never going to beat that guy. That guy's super easy to use. If I do understand that my competition is actually Excel or the intern, well, the intern's bad at stuff. The intern quits on you. The intern makes mistakes in a way that software never would. The intern doesn't understand the full history of everything you've done with this customer. There's all kinds of stuff your software can do that the intern can't. But you have to recognize first that the intern is maybe your competition. So that's the second thing, is understanding how a customer does the comparison in their mind and then positioning against that.
Love it. Because in the end, you need a lot of the times you're competing against something you don't think, and often it's Excel or it's a real manual work.
Real manual work is often what we're competing with in B2B. It's manual work, it's Excel spreadsheets, it's piecing together a bunch of tools that were never built to solve this problem in the first place, but they're good enough solution. And so change is hard, and customers are going to have to make a real effort to stop doing what they're doing today to do something else. It feels risky. So we're going to have to show up and show that there's incredible value in making that change. And then wherever possible, we're trying to take the risk out of it. How do we ensure that this change will be successful and everybody will adopt it, and the person picking isn't going to get in trouble for suggesting that, hey, we should do this thing in this different way?
Are you struggling to find people and companies which have access to your ideal customer profile? At Redditis, we just launched a second side of the marketplace, which allows you to search, filter, and contact B2B SaaS affiliates which have access to the audience you're looking for. We do this by leveraging first-party data sources. Want to learn more? Go to getredditis.com.
And if SaaS companies now think like, hey, we definitely have to do something about our positioning, do you have a step-by-step process for them to find their unique value prop?
I do. So this is what I would consider my life's work at this point. So when I started out early in my career in tech, I was in product marketing, and I was learning about positioning by doing it. At the beginning, I was doing it and I didn't even know that's what it was called. Eventually, I took some marketing classes and realized there was this thing called positioning, and that was the thing we were doing. And what frustrated me is there didn't seem to be an accepted methodology for doing positioning. And that really bugged me because it seemed like such a fundamental thing that we're always worried about, that we're always thinking about. But there wasn't, every time I talked to a senior vice president of marketing and say, how do you do positioning? Everybody's doing it in a little bit different way. A lot of people were just doing trial and error. We're just going to throw something out there, see if it sticks. If it doesn't work, we'll throw it out. We'll try again. And that bothered me. And so I decided to kind of work through, if we had some kind of a process to start with, this would be better than nothing, even if the process wasn't perfect. So the way I look at it is, I started this way. I said, well, let's break positioning down into its component pieces. And we know what the component pieces are. We kind of agree on that, even in marketing school. There's 5 things. First of all, it's competitive alternatives. Like if you didn't exist, what would a customer do? The second thing is differentiated capabilities. So these are the features of your product or your company, the stuff you got that the other guys don't have. The third thing is value. And at the end of the day, customer doesn't actually care that much about your features. They care what the features can do for their business. What's the value you can deliver that the other guys can't? I'm in B2B, and we care a lot about segmentation. So the fourth thing is, who's our best fit customer? Who are we actually trying to sell this thing to? The fifth thing is market category. Like, am I a database or a business intelligence tool? Am I a robot or a self-driving vehicle? These things are all different. So what's the market category I'm going to position the product in? So those are the 5 things. My methodology is based on my observation that these 5 things have a relationship to each other. If you think about things like, what's my differentiated value I can deliver to a customer? Well, my differentiated value that I could deliver to a customer is completely dependent on my differentiated capabilities. I don't get to just make it up from nothing. It comes from the stuff my product can do or my company can do that no one else can. But then when you think about it, it's only differentiated if I compare it to competitors. I can't figure out value without understanding my differentiated capabilities. I can't figure out differentiated capabilities until I figure out who I'm differentiated from. So these things are all connected. And then if you think about it, what's my definition of a best fit customer? Best fit customer is a customer that really cares a lot about the value that only I can deliver. So I can't figure out best fit customer until I know value. And then market category is the same thing. It's a bit like the context I'm going to position the product in such that this value is kind of making sense to these folks I'm trying to target. But then, of course, I set market category, and that changes who my competition is. So, oh no, everything relates to everything else. In my methodology, we start with competitive alternatives. And we start there because what I found is that if we started anywhere else, we'd get some positioning that looked okay in the office, but it wouldn't work when we took it out to the market because it was insufficiently differentiated from the other things that a customer could do to solve the problem. So we start with competitive alternatives. That's our stake in the ground. We start there. So this is what I have to position against, or put another way, this is what I got to beat in order to win a deal. So once I got that, then I can say, okay, these are my competitors. What have I got that they don't have? And I can list my differentiated capabilities. And this is usually easy. I fill up a whiteboard on this stuff. And then I can get to value. And what I do is I go down that list of capabilities. And for every capability, I ask the question, so what? So, okay, we got this whiz bang AI feature. So why does a customer care? What is the value that feature delivers for a customer's business? And then when I'm doing that, I can look for the patterns that come out, because I don't want 59 points of value. I want 1, 2, 3 maximum value themes or value buckets. At the end of that step, I can say, look, you want to pick me because I'm the only product on the market that can give you a combination of this plus this, and the features are tucked in underneath. Then once I got that, I can say, okay, I can go sell this thing to anybody, but not everybody cares about those value points. So what are the characteristics of a target account that make them really care a lot about the value they can only get from me? So that's how you get the 4th thing. And then the 5th thing is market category. So now I got value, I got best fit customers. What's the best context to position this thing in that makes that value obvious to those folks? That's how my methodology works. I wrote a book about this. It's called Obviously Awesome, that gets into the gory details of how to do it. But the idea is that's how we figure out positioning. The second thing I think that's really important is, and I've learned this from working with clients, is once you have that positioning, if you're B2B and you have a sales team, you're going to really take that positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. And that's for two reasons. One, your salespeople just looking at your positioning won't know what to do with it. They need to know how to tell the story. And then second thing, it's a really good way to test your positioning, to just build a sales pitch out of it and let's go test it on some real prospects and see if it lands. So I wrote a second book about how to take that positioning and translate it into a sales pitch. That's what my work is all about in 2 minutes.
Nice. Well, we're going to talk a bit longer about it because the second book you mentioned is Sales Pitch, How to Craft a Story to Stand Out and Win. But that kind of fully comes from positioning yourself first before you can craft that story, right?
Yeah, like I never thought I would end up writing a sales book, but I got here for a few reasons. One is interesting. So I started working with companies on positioning work, and we get done the positioning, and the marketers would be happy because they have differentiated value, and that's kind of the core of your messaging. So they go, great, we know who the competitors are, we know the differentiated value, we know the market category, we can go build messaging out of that. See you later, everything's good. But then you look at sales, and sales would be going, huh? Yeah, we get this. That's good. And then they go back and do the same pitch they always did. And you're like, hang up, people. We can't have this positioning over here. And then sales telling a totally different story. So at first I thought, I'll just take whatever the standard sales pitch structure and figure out how to translate positioning into that. What I discovered is there is no standard sales pitch structure, which surprised me a lot because salespeople do a lot of training. If you meet salespeople, they've all done training, not like marketers at all. Salespeople have done training on how to negotiate, handle objections, build a rapport with an account, how to ask for the sale, how to move a deal along. Like there's a lot of stuff that salespeople get trained on, but nowhere in that training is there, here's what a good pitch looks like. Because there's this assumption that a pitch exists. And maybe it came from marketing. You go over to marketing, nobody in marketing knows that they don't know anything about what's going on in sales. They don't know what a good pitch looks like. And so as a result, what you have are these pitches that are like the Wild West. Like the reps are just making stuff up because nobody's given them anything good to work with. And so anyways, I worked with a couple of companies that I thought did a good job on pitches. One of them was IBM. So when I worked there, they had a pitch structure that had come from a consulting engagement with these really smart sales consultants called the Corporate Executive Board. This is like 20 years ago when that company still existed. They had created this customized pitch structure for IBM based on the kind of stuff IBM was selling. So I got exposed to it there. When I left IBM and I went back to a startup, me and the VP sales pulled out some of the nuggets from that sales structure and used that as a pitch structure. And then I've been using a modified version of that pitch structure ever since. So I don't know if my sales pitch structure is the best thing out there. I highly suspect it is not, but I'll tell you something. It's way better than having nothing. It's way better than what I see and when I say 95%, I really mean it. 95% of the companies I've worked with don't really have a structure at all. They're just kind of Wild Westing it. So I started teaching that to my clients because they were like, okay, we have this positioning, but we don't know how to make it real for the salespeople. So I started teaching that to my clients. And then after a while, I just thought, well, I should write this down in a book. And then people have something other than nothing, which is what they have right now. I've been 10 years at this. It's coming up to 300-ish companies that I've worked with. And all of them are using a modified version of that pitch structure they learned from me. So I think it kind of works. And I think it's valuable for people. And it certainly gets people thinking about, well, we should have a structure rather than just, whatever the hell the reps are doing out there.
Nice. And I think it's also helping you and the companies, I guess, to measure results, right? Because positioning is, I won't say it's fundamental, but you can't really see the conversions changing or things like that. But when you turn it into an actual proper sales pitch, then you can already measure it pretty quickly.
Well, in my opinion, it's the only way you can test positioning, because without the sales pitch, what we're left with is trying to test messaging. So we take the positioning, we turn it into messaging, and then we'll make a page out of it. And then we're going to do A/B testing on the landing page. Well, now I'm not just testing positioning anymore. Now I'm testing copywriting and page design and my ability to drive the right traffic. Like, are these even people I care about that I'm measuring this for? And then a lot of the companies I'm working with, they're enterprise B2B. They don't get tons and tons of traffic on their website. So how long do we got to run this test before we get a pass fail? Like, it's just a bad way to test positioning. Whereas if I take the positioning and map it to a sales pitch, Then what I've got, well, I have complete control over who I'm doing the pitch to. So I can control for, am I pitching to the right people? So yes, I'm going to only pitch it to qualified prospects. And then we can go in there and get a lot of signal during that story. So we can see, like, where is the customer, squinting their eyes and going, I don't understand this, versus where is the customer getting really excited? What are the questions that the customer is asking? And then we can actually say, well, hey, why did you ask that? Seems obvious to us. How come you don't get it, buddy? And all these things. And so it gives us a lot of signal to tune the pitch. If we're doing this pitch with an experienced sales rep, a very experienced sales rep knows when a pitch is good and when a pitch is bad. So if I can train an experienced sales rep on it, get them comfortable with it, have them do a bunch of practice pitches, then I can just ask them, is this a better pitch than the old pitch? And you're going to get a good answer there, because who better to judge this than that person? I like to stay really practical on all this stuff. So in my work, I think we got this positioning. Let's just turn it into a sales pitch and test it out and see how it lands. And if we know it lands in sales, now all we got to do is make the marketing copy tell the same story that we already know works in sales because we've tested it with real prospects. In my opinion, it's the best way to do it.
Yeah, it's a really quick but also cheap way to test it, because in the end, you just have to train a couple of salespeople to get it out there.
That's the idea.
If we're going to dive deeper into positioning, I think we now have the components to get it right for SaaS companies. Do you have some best practices for companies you've seen which have really good positioning?
Yeah, there's a bunch of things that I think are important. One is, I don't think positioning works very well if we build it and it's just a little project in the marketing department, for a lot of reasons. We really want to get sales involved because they know a lot about how customers buy and how they make decisions and what they like and what they don't like. If we're building it in the marketing department without any of that input from sales, I think we're really missing a trick. The second thing is, if we don't get sales involved in creating the positioning, they're not really going to understand it when we get it at the end, and they're likely to just reject it and say, nah, that's stupid. I'm not using that. Forget it. So one way to get their buy-in is, let's get their opinions while we're building it so that we can bake their opinions into it. So that's sales. But I also think ideally we have product involved, because product knows a lot about differentiated capabilities. They know a lot about how our product stacks up against other products in the market and what's differentiating and what isn't. Often marketing doesn't understand that as deeply as product does. So getting product involved is, again, really valuable, because they've got something really valuable to bring to the table. And ideally, they need to understand what the positioning is as well. So now I've got sort of a cross-functional team. I've got marketing, product, and sales. If you're a smaller company, I think you need the CEO involved, because the CEO's got opinions about this. Like, if you come up with this positioning and say, hey, guess what? We're not a database anymore. We're a business intelligence tool. Do you think the CEO wants to hear about that? If you don't have the input and guidance from the CEO, who is thinking about this at a bigger picture level than the team is, I think that's a mistake, and the positioning might not stick, because you'll present it to the CEO and they'll say, no, I disagree. So in my opinion, if we really want to do a good job of positioning, it's a cross-functional team effort. I got marketing, sales, product. I got the CEO involved. And then if I'm going to do this cross-functional team effort, I need to come with a process. I can't just go in there and Wild West wing it, because then it'll turn into a battle of opinions. If we just get everybody in the room and go, hey, why does everybody love our stuff? That's just going to be people giving their random opinions. Like, what sales always says when we ask that question? Why does everyone love our stuff? Sales says, because our sales reps are so great. They just care so much. Or product will say, because we have the best product. Marketing will say, because we just do a great job marketing. Customer success will be in there and say, are you kidding me? We are saving all these deals. We don't want that. So we need some kind of a process that takes the opinions out of it. I think my process is one way you could do that. I'm sure there's others. So I think these are the best practices. I think it's a cross-functional team effort. I think you need a process to follow. It sounds self-serving, but when I did this stuff internally as the vice president of marketing, what really bugged me is that I had to run a process, and that sucked, because I couldn't represent marketing and be the facilitator at the same time. I always wished I could bring in an outside facilitator to facilitate these things so that I didn't have to do it. In the work I do, I come as the outside facilitator, so I can ask the question that is maybe uncomfortable politically for other people to ask and say, oh, that's interesting. VP sales, CEO, you're saying very different things. Both of these things cannot be true. Sometimes you need an outside perspective on that to sort of be the tiebreaker on things or try to get consensus when things get contentious. So I think that helps too, but it is not a requirement. I used to do this stuff internally on my own without an outside facilitator. I think companies can absolutely do that. I think if you get stuck, an outside facilitator is one way to get unstuck.
And regarding the process, is it like a workshop style where you get everybody
Yeah.
into a room and you work them to get the components of the positioning right?
That's exactly it. In the work I do, we get everybody together in a room, we work through the process, and we get that sucker done in a week.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to take a lot of time.
That's right. The key to it is getting the right people in the room, because we need folks that understand the customer, folks that understand the product, folks that understand, the dynamics of the market, how customers buy, all that stuff. We need to bring that expertise into the room. I need the right people in sales, the right people in product. I generally need the CEO. If it's a big company, I don't get the CEO of Google, but I probably need whoever owns P&L for the division in the room. And people that have a stake in this or care a lot about it need to be in the room so we can have the fight and get agreement and alignment on whatever we come up with.
Yeah. Nice. And we kind of talked about it a little bit, because if then that's done right, you turn it into a real pitch, you start testing it. How do you track, or how do you measure product positioning effectiveness?
Well, positioning kind of affects everything. It affects the quality of the leads we get. It affects the velocity of a lead going through the pipeline. It affects conversion rates at every single stage. So can I just pick one number and say, oh, this number went up and therefore the positioning is better? It's kind of hard to do. So the way we test it is I'm going to translate it into a sales pitch, and then I'm going to test it with my sales folks. The first test is, does my best salesperson, once they're comfortable with it and we've got a pitch that's working, does that person subjectively think this pitch is better? Because they're the expert on it. And generally, if they think it's better, it is better. But then what we should see when we implement that pitch, we should immediately see some benefit to the pitch being approved from the point of that first call beyond. So what it means is we would expect better conversion from first call to a real opportunity. We would expect there to be more velocity in that. So it's quicker to get a deal cooking from first call to whatever. We should expect those deals to be bigger. We should expect less discounting. We should expect a lot of things. But if we're B2B and it takes us 6 months to close a deal, we might not actually see the impact on revenue for months. And then same thing, if we turn it into messaging and we put it on the homepage and stuff, like assuming we don't screw any of that up, like assuming we're good at messaging and we're good at campaigns and we're good at everything else, we should see a lot of those metrics turn up too. But we don't know, because it takes a long time for something to move through the pipeline. So in my world, we're like, okay, what is the minimum to say we did something here? The minimum is my salespeople think this is a better sales pitch than the old pitch. If we can achieve that, which you think, how hard could that be? Let me tell you, it's hard. People are used to the old pitch, even if it's crap, even if they complain about it. They'll be like, oh, we don't like this new pitch. I'm used to telling a joke on slide 3. What happened to my slide 3? I missed that slide. So if you can convince your best salespeople that this is a better pitch, then probably is really a better pitch. But like I say, we should see immediate improvement in some of the metrics we have from first pitch forward, and then some of the other stuff is going to take longer.
I love how you phrase it, because in the end, like, people are reluctant to change sometimes. So starting here is a great way. I think it's also one challenge people encounter, because like the components of positioning sound really practical, really quick to do. You can do it in a week, you mentioned.
Implementing the positioning does not take a week, unfortunately.
Okay, but getting the proper positioning right and then implementing will take longer. But still, it sounds
much longer.
Yeah, but I guess like people are going to run into a lot of challenges along the way. What are some of the common challenges?
There's a few things that I think companies have to really watch out for. So one is, we'll get everybody in agreement and alignment in the room. And then in some of the really big companies, they will go to build a pitch and get a lot of people involved in building the pitch that weren't there in the workshop. And so they got their own opinions about how things. And so we get this nice clean pitch, but then it starts getting messy because people are trying to add stuff to it or take stuff away from it. And then we had the same thing on the messaging side. Like we'll all get agreement on here's what the value themes are. But then the marketers will be like, oh, well, I got my little pet thing. And we've always said XYZ, so that needs to stay. Or the opposite. We've always said that and that's boring. So we don't want to say that anymore. So I would say the biggest challenge is you got to pick it and stick it. You got to stop messing with it. You got to get agreement in the room and say, look, this is what it is. And we're going to move on to the execution of this. And we're going to stop relitigating this positioning every week. And we shouldn't be changing this positioning unless something significant happens in the market that requires us to change it. That would be a new competitor comes into the market, or maybe there's an acquisition, or your competitors catch up to you on a couple of things and that's surprising. And now you got a thing that was differentiating no longer is differentiating. So now you got to fix that. Or you put out your own new release and there's significant new functionality there that actually allows you to deliver some value you couldn't before. Then we're going to change the positioning, and then we're going to change the pitch that goes with that. And then we're going to change the messaging that goes with that. But if nothing has happened, why are we messing with it? We should not be messing with it. So the hardest thing I think is to take the positioning, stick it, and then just relentlessly execute on it consistently, over and over and over and over. Just don't mess with it. Like it'll just start working at the point where everybody's getting bored of it. They want to do something different. I think consistency is really, really powerful. So you just got to just grind it.
Nice. We're going to talk about the future of positioning. There's a lot of things changing, especially in SaaS. Our market's getting more crowded with all the new AI tools coming out there. How do you see the future of positioning?
It's interesting. If you go back and read the first book that talked about positioning, which is this book called Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind by these guys, Rees and Trout, they have a whole chapter talking about why do we need positioning? And the reason why we need positioning is because markets are incredibly crowded. Oh my gosh, markets are so crowded. And that was 1982. So we've had a crowded market problem for a while. If you're in a market, you've got competition. You've got a lot of competition. And so I don't think that problem is new. Is the problem getting worse? Yes. And so does that mean positioning is more important than it's ever been? In my opinion, yeah, it does. Now, I also believe that positioning is one of these fundamental things. Like it's being able to succinctly describe why a customer should pick you versus anyone else. That's kind of a fundamental base level marketing thing. I don't think that's something that changes because technology is changing or markets, like all those things change. But this thinking around how do we stand in the market and how do we make sure a customer understands why they should pick us versus anyone else, I don't think that's actually too susceptible to trends. And if I look at positioning, like our fundamental understanding of positioning is fairly consistent since the 80s, which is when we first started seeing markets with many, many products. I don't see this stuff changing a lot, at least conceptually how we think about it. I don't see it changing a lot, even in, again, like a lot of ways that we execute on it might change. So this is the thing about marketing, right? Like tactics change all the time, but fundamental underlying strategy doesn't actually change all that much. It's how we make it real in the market changes all the time. We used to do print ads all the time. Now we don't do print ads so much. Tactics change, but the underlying fundamentals of marketing strategy do not actually change that much.
We're going to start wrapping the podcast with the final two questions. When we talk about growing a B2B SaaS, what kind of advice would you give a SaaS founder who's just starting out and growing to 10K monthly recurring revenue, so really early stage?
I would say they should really be thinking about who loves my stuff and why. Do I have assumptions about that? Like when I built this product, did I build it with certain assumptions in mind? And then how can I test those assumptions? So let's say I built this product and I decided this is a product and it's going to help quick serve restaurants do faster turnover on tables or something. And the competition is pen and paper or whatever. When you go and you sell some deals, is that true? Like, does it do what you thought it would do? Is it quick serve restaurants or does it turn out it's actually more sit down restaurants or a different kind of restaurant? Are you really competing with what you thought you were competing with? Or are you seeing that people are doing something you didn't actually anticipate? How can you use that information to get more effective in your go-to-market stuff in the future? So, hey, we learned that it's not really quick serve restaurants, it's these other guys, so we're just going to target them. And hey, we learned the value is actually more this than that, and so we're going to tighten that up. Understanding what your fundamental go-to-market assumptions are and then trying to test those assumptions and build on that, I think is really important. If you do that effectively, then I think you get to a great product with really solid positioning in the market much quicker than if you're just kind of like taking your victim as you find them.
Yeah. And then let's assume now we passed the 10K MOR and we're going to make a huge step towards 10 million ARR. But what kind of advice would you give SaaS founders here? So they did pass the initial threshold and now are moving all the way to 10 million.
Well, in my opinion, the first wave of customers is all about validating your thesis. Are we competing against who we thought we were competing against? Are our differentiators what we thought they were? What is the value we can deliver that no one else can? And who's a really good fit for that? Most companies go through a phase where they have a wave of customers where they're trying to prove out those things. But once you've proven that out, then you're looking at, well, how can I really smash my foot on the gas and go after precisely these customers with precisely this message? Because I know I can beat these competitors all day with exactly that. So once you've gone through this first wave where we validated what I would call your positioning thesis, now we can really tighten up the positioning and just run right at that market and actually invest some money in marketing and sales resources to go get it because we know that it works.
Nice. Love it. Where we're going to wrap up, I'm going to try to summarize. So when we talk about positioning or how you defined it, positioning defines how your product is the best in the world in delivering something. It's not brand, it's not messaging. Great positioning will help you to create differentiated value, and this is how you will win. Big mistakes, not thinking about positioning, not having sales and product and CEO involved. It needs to be a cross-functional team effort. Components of positioning, competitor, not understanding the competition in the mind of the customers. How does the customer actually compares you? Differentiating capabilities. What do you have versus the real competitor? Value. Always ask, so what? We have X feature. Try to limit the number of values you will list out. Who's the best fit customer, which really cares about the value, and then define your market category. So who are you going to target? Have a proper process to create it. You can create it within a week. It will take a lot longer to implement. A quick way to do it is turn it into a real pitch to test it, because that is the quickest way to test your positioning. You will have complete control with the right people, lots of signals, instant feedback within the calls. And if you really want to get quick feedback, ask your sales if they find it better. Do they have better conversions, quicker velocity? Challenges you run into, changing the components after your agreement. Stick with it and start working with it consistently. For 10K MOR, ask yourself who loves your stuff and why. And for 10 million ARR, validate your positioning thesis. That's it.
It's pretty good, man. That's the summary. You're like the human chat GPT, man. Let's summarize that right there.
If people want to get in contact with you, April, how can they do so?
Best thing to do is look at my website. So it's aprildunford.com. There's a bunch of stuff you'll see there. I got a newsletter. If you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get access to a bunch of templates that go with the books to help you work on this stuff if you want to work on your positioning on your own. And there's links to the books there if you can't find the books, although I'm all over Amazon, so you shouldn't have too hard of a time there. And then I also have a podcast. If you want to geek out on positioning and go deep on some of this stuff, I have a podcast where I pick particular topics related to positioning and we go deep on that. You can find the links for that on my website as well. So that's probably the best place to go look. It's cool. aprildunford.com.
Can't miss it, but we'll make sure to link it. We're going to link to your book. Obviously, awesome. Sales pitch, how to craft a story to stand out and win. To the newsletter with the templates, and then also to your podcast. So everybody can just click on the links.
Great.
Wherever they're listening. Thanks for coming on. For people listening, please leave us a review. If you like this episode, we're going to add a poll to this on Spotify. So let me know what you thought. It's always great to hear. Thanks again for coming on, April.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for watching this show of the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. You made it till the end, so I think we can assume you like this content. If you did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like this content, feel free to reach out if you want to sponsor the show, if you have a specific guest in mind, if you have a specific topic you want us to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to take a look at it. If you want to know more about Reditus, feel free to reach out as well. But for now, have a great day and good luck growing your B2B SaaS.